Hey everyone, I'm Jeff with Motion Pro. Today we are talking about changing off-road motorcycle tires, and we brought in our friend Anthony Vicencio from Dunlop to show you the way.
What's up, guys? So yeah, I've been fortunate enough to help out Dunlop the past few years with tire fitment at the Supercross and motocross events. So I'm glad to be here today to be able to share some of those tips of what we do on a weekly basis from weekend to weekend, things that make my job easier and keep us safe too, because we do change quite a few tires and you don't want to get injured and you want to make sure you're nice and consistent. So we're going to go over a few of those things today, and I hope you learned something. Now typically whenever we do this at a Supercross, we have 30 to 40 tires in front of us. So the first thing you want to do is lay out all of your tools. Now I have my tire paste, my cornstarch baby powder, my Motion Pro tire gauge, my Motion Pro bead buddy, which is critical. You need this. If you don't have this, trust me, you need it. We got our spoon type tire iron. This is just a preference thing. There's a couple different options that you have. This is what I like to use. And then I have my ratcheting wrench here for the rim lock and a core remover, which is very important. So first things first on this, I want to find the valve stem, remove the cap, as well as the lock nut. So we pop those two bad boys off. I don't know if you can see it very well, but we'll get you a better angle. And I'm going to go ahead and release the air out of the tire. So stage those there. Then I'll take my ratchet and go to the rim lock, and we're going to go ahead and loosen this up almost to the end of the threads, but not quite, and just leave that right there. Now when I work on this, I usually like to start off with the rotor side up, and reason being is I'm going to be using a little bit of leverage here to go ahead and to try and get the bead over the wheel. And when I do that, if my hand happens to slip, I really don't want to be busting up my knuckles on the sprocket. So that's just a preference thing for me. And also on my stand, I don't usually use that little rod that sticks up here. I like to have it where it'll move around freely, because if I go and I push up with my thigh against the tire, it'll catch on the sprocket here, and that'll be like an extra hand that'll give me a little bit of leverage when I'm going and working around the tire. All right, now that the air is out of the tire, what we want to do, we locate right here. This is where the valve stem is going to be, and typically the rim lock is either going to be right next to it or across from it. When I do a tire change, I like to start right next to the rim lock, and I'll go ahead and break down the bead. So I dig a spoon in there, and I usually do it on a knobby, so that way it gives me a little bit more leverage. And I push this up against here, so it's catching on the sprocket there, and I'm able to start pushing down. This one's gonna be a little snug. Holy smokes. Let's give it a way around and see what we got. There we go. Once it starts to go, it gets a lot easier. Now that we got the first bead broken down, I'm going to go just to the side of the rim lock. And when I do this, you'll notice I have a fist here, and as I apply pressure, I open my hand, and that's going to prevent, if my hand slips, it's going to catch like this, as opposed to me being committed to it and boom, hitting my knuckles. So that's a huge tip right there. So we got this one going. Let's get our spoons in, perfect. And then you can see the rim lock right there. I'm going to go just next to it, and we're going to get the entire bead over that rim lock. And you'll notice here I have my spoon underneath the rotor, but I keep my forearm here to keep that from popping up and hitting me in the mouth, which has happened. So now I'm just following this all the way around. And we take small bites. No matter how many tires you change, it's always small bites. Otherwise, it turns into a bear. So I'm going to do the same thing on this side to get the bead down. There we go. So now the second bead is down, and I'm going to do the same thing on this side. The valve stem happens to be right next to the rim lock, so I'm just going to start with the valve stem. And same thing. When I do this, notice hand stays open. I can't stress that enough. It'll save you in the long run. And then now we're going over the rim lock. There we are. And when it gets tight like that, notice I'm not trying to strong arm it because you'll strain yourself a bit. You just want to kind of put your body into it. That way it's a little bit easier. It gives you a little bit more leverage. Now one thing here, if you notice, I started off over here and I started to take it off up until about this point. Then I stopped here, went to the other side, and took the bead off to about the same point on the other side. So you'll notice that the rim lock is right in the center of what's taken off already, and this is what remains, because I want to end here, and I'll show you why in just a second. Once I get to this point where the bead's completely off on both sides, I'm going to go right here across from the rim lock. I'm going to put my spoon all the way through to the very bottom across both beads, and I'll get a little bit of leverage so that way I create a gap like that. And now when I go to take this off, I'm just going to press down and then push forward a bit. And that's going to pop right out just like that. So now what I need to do first thing is put my valve core back in. We'll set this aside. Then this is a good time where you want to inspect your wheel. Make sure your rim strip is good. This one's pretty good. Pretty clean too. Now I'm going to go and take my cornstarch baby powder, and I'm going to put some on the inside of the carcass of the new tire, which happens to be a MX53. It's our new hard pack tire from Dunlop. Then I take my tire lube, and when I lube this, the part I want to get is just from the bead to the outside, not so much on the inside. So we'll get this on here. Now I get my tube. We'll set this here. And I want to start with the valve stem and follow this all the way around before I put the tire on. Okay. Then I want to get this little lock nut for the valve stem. I'm going to pull a little bit of the tube out, and I'm going to fish it right through the hole in the wheel, and then thread the lock nut on just a little bit, just so it holds it in place. And then we're going to take our spoon, and I'm going to go underneath on the bottom bead. I'm going to get it in between on the rim lock and the wheel. So when it starts off, it's going to look like that underneath. And I need to make sure this stays above the wheel. This bead stays above the wheel on this side that I'm working on. Now, some people like to either push or pull when they spoon on a tire. You'll see guys that change tires this way. You see guys that change tires this way. On this process, or on this part of the process, I like to push the bead on, and then once we get to the next side, I'll show you that I pull. Now, one thing you might notice that I'm doing, I'm leaving my spoon in the entire time when I'm working on this. Reason being, the more times I have to take it out and then try and push the spoon back in, it could potentially damage the wheel. We don't want to do that. And in case you maybe have a habit of doing that, we do have the rim shield right here. It's a really easy tool you can use. You just go ahead and lift up the bead, wedge this in between the bead and the rim, and it hooks on real nice. And then you just take your spoon, and then the rim shield's gonna take all of the force, so you can really beat it up and you're not gonna damage your wheels. Really, really handy if you need it. So there's that there. Now to move forward, I'm gonna go ahead and lube this side of the tire. Again, what I was saying, some folks, they like to push when they mount the second side of the tire, or they like to pull. That's all a preference thing. Me personally, I like to pull, so I will show you how I do that, because it's a little important with the placement of our bead buddy, and I'll show you why in just a second. So let's lube this up real quick. So now that we have this lubricated, I'm going to go ahead and show you how I get the bead buddy in there. Now we're working with the rim lock here and the valve stem right next to it. So I'm going to go just to the left, my left, of the rim lock, and I'm going to get these two spoons in here and then place my bead buddy under the bead and hook it right onto the spoke. Reason being, this is going to be my end point, and I'm going to pull all the way around. And then on this first bite, it's going to be right next to the rim lock. So I'm going to get my spoon in there. I'll hold a finger to make sure that the rim lock stays pushed in. And then now that should be down in there pretty good. So now that we're just past the valve stem and the rim lock, I don't need this spoon right at the moment. The bead's already wanting to go inside the wheel. So I'm gonna hold my palm on the sidewall of the tire and hold the bead from popping back out. And I'm just gonna walk this all the way around. We're gonna take really small bites. Like I said before, no matter how many tire changes you do, it's always small bites. The bites never get any bigger. And we're just gonna go nice and easy. And also, you don't have to crank on it really hard. You just wanna give it a nice little, up to about 90. And cruise along with this until you start to feel a bit of tension. Now, if you look, it's starting to get a little bit tight. There's maybe a third of the tire remaining that needs to be seated onto, or needs to be mounted onto the wheel. Right now, as it gets tight, is a good time to go ahead and break the bead down, again on a knobby for leverage, but break it down so that way it gets to the drop center of the wheel, and that'll give you a little bit more slack this way. Now, a lot of times you might see the bead pop back up. If it pops back up, that means you don't have enough tension on this side, so you need to go a little bit further along on this side of the mount in order for it to give tension to pull the bead down into the drop center on the wheel. So now I got a second spoon since it's tight, and I'm going to slowly bring these in, and I'm watching over here to make sure that the bead stays down and seated. And now we're getting real close. So you'll notice how much is left. Now I don't want to take this spoon out. I want to just slide it over a small amount. And we want to go nice and easy here. This is where 90% of the scratches happen on wheels, is because someone will get to this point, they'll crank it all the way over like that, and you either pinch the tube or the spoon pops out, and then you have to try and get it in there again, and that ends up scratching up the wheel. So you want to be really careful at this point. Patience here is going to pay off very well for you. So I'm going to go slide that over just a little bit. And if it gets difficult to slide, you can just grab a spoke and then push it over with your thumb. That's what I try to do. And it's baby bites right here. And notice I'm not cranking it over. I don't even need to get that satisfying thunk as it goes over the wall of the wheel. You just want to let it inch over. Let's see if I could get you a better shot. But it's really, really small. Really small. And then right here, we're getting close to our last bite. So I'm leaving the spoon in. Last bite's going to go right in between the two, right in the center of what's remaining on the bead. And as I pull this last bite, I'm going to pull the spoon up so that way I don't risk biting onto the tube and potentially pinching it. So we're going to go here, and it just pops right out. So there you go. Now the hardest part's done. And again, I can't stress this thing enough. This is, if you go to the Dunlop truck, every single one of us is using one of these. It's a lifesaver. I cannot stress that enough. So now our tire is mounted onto the wheel. Now I want to go ahead and get that valve stem exposed. We're going to go ahead and take our trick little swivel chuck and put some air in here. Make sure we get the bead nice and seated. So we got one for sure. I'm going to pop it over to the other side. Looks like both of them are seated. So I'll hang this back up. And then before I bleed the air out, I want to go ahead and tighten my rim lock. And it's a good habit to have, because then you have less variables, less things moving around before you bleed the air down, so you don't potentially get it pinched in here. Right now the tube is really blown up against the side of the walls of the tire, so the odds of it getting caught in between the rim lock is less likely with that amount of pressure. So this is nice and snug. Now we want to bleed the pressure down, so I'll take our sweet little tire gauge, digital tire gauge, which again, if you go to the Dunlop truck, we're all using this at the Supercross races. So I'm going to bleed the air out, and you'll just bring this down to the desired pressure. All right, so we're bled down. Now all that's left to do is clean up our mess, which is a detailed part that I like to keep a habit of doing. We'll flop this back over to this side. And the reason I like to do this not only because it looks trick to have fresh tires on your wheels, but it also physically puts your hands on the bead, and you can see if there was any error you might have made, or if there's something that you might have missed. It's just one more kind of like a quality control, if you will. And looks like we're perfect. Now I'm going to go ahead and put the valve cap back on. I'm going to thread that on. And then another thing, this little lock nut, a lot of us have a habit of cinching that down to the wheel. That's got to come up, and it actually holds the valve cap on, and leave it that way. Just because if there was any reason that the tire might slip on the wheel of the tire, or if the tire might slip on the wheel, it can cock this sideways, and if you have it cinched down too tight, it could potentially tear the tube. So you don't want that to happen. You want that to have a little bit of leeway like that. Aside from that, I believe we're finished, and we successfully mounted on a tire, a fresh Dunlop, onto this sweet wheel right here. And I think I'm all ready and warmed up for Anaheim. So thank you guys for watching. I really appreciate it. And keep an eye out for some videos in the future. We'll have some more tech tips for you.